So my research is on the place of the voluntary sector in multi-level governance, and increasingly over the past decade, voluntary sector organizations have become increasingly important in social policy making, both in terms of their contribution to the policy making process, but also because they're at the forefront of a lot of service delivery at the provincial and local level. So what I'm trying to study is how that role and that place of the voluntary sector organizations have evolved in multi-level governance over the past decade. And what I've observed since 2005, 2006 is that the political landscape for voluntary organizations in Canada has really changed radically. In 2000, it was the height of the strong relationship between the federal government and the voluntary sector. There was a lot of money that was dedicated, $95 million in Canada, that were dedicated towards strengthening the relationship between the federal government and the voluntary sector in order to make sure that the voluntary sector had good, strong capacity in order to contribute to the governance process. But the context has changed radically. In a short 6 years, voluntary organizations have lost a lot of their funding. Institutionalized space governance arrangements have been constrained to the extent that voluntary sector organizations in Canada are finding it increasingly difficult to have access to the political arena. And I think that's really important for multi-level governance, because it means that their contribution to the policy-making process has been weakened at the very moment where they're really important, particularly at the provincial and the local level. So in my research, I kind of look at the implications of this weakening of associational networks and how that impacts on policy making and in particular social policy debates. I think that the federal government has a responsibility to create a fertile policy ground and to support organizations so that they can participate in the sharing of knowledge, in the research, and in the discussion around social policy and what are our priorities and what are our objectives. Voluntary sector organizations in Canada are organized very vertically. They tend to have federal associations with a lot of discussion around social policy, but each are organized in provincial and local associations. So voluntary organizations are really important for taking the lessons that we have on the ground, the policy innovation, and then shoring that up into national debates. So if we're breaking that connection, if we're cutting back on the funding that's available to voluntary organizations, we're losing these ties, these really important connections between the experiments that are taking place on the ground and our national kind of social policy values arena. In Canada, that's increasingly important because in multi-level governance, since the arrival of the Conservative government at the federal level, there's been a shift away from multi-level governance towards increasingly bilateral forms of governance. And that means that we're seeing a lot of diversity around social policy in terms of the different programs and experiments. And because of that diversity and some would say asymmetry, there's a need to have a space and to have a discussion about what we're learning from these various experiments and also what mistakes are happening so that we can better improve our social programs for Canada as a whole. And I think in that respect, there's a lot to learn from the European Union and the open method of coordination. One of the strengths about the open method of coordination is really that they've created these spaces for citizens to participate in policy making. There's a recognition of the importance of think tanks and activists and social policy actors because they're important to creating a space and also creating a sense of social citizenship in Europe. I think in Canada we need to learn from that in order to recognize the importance of these spaces at the national level, the importance of these discussions around social citizenship, and that's something that has been sorely lacking in Canada. and the less we do have that kind of debate and discussion at the federal level, the more differences we'll have, and the more fences we'll have from one province to the other, and I think that's really problematic. Another other important thing is that a lot of the bilateral governance arrangements are tailored towards reporting outcomes, and that's become our benchmark for assessing how we're doing in social policy terms. And a lot of the rhetoric around this growing like public reporting of accountability is based on this notion that citizens will be able to examine at this data and then hold their provincial governments to account, and that's the way that we can hold provincial governments accountable. And I think that that's a misleading understanding of citizen engagement, because it assumes that citizens will have all of the skills and information to make sense of this incredibly complex data and information. And here is where voluntary sector organizations are really important to help citizens engage in that area, help citizens, educate citizens, give them the skills to make sense of the information that's out there, so that they can better influence their governments and better create a policy that reflects their values and vision. Thank you.